What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video, and today we're going to be going over the two-handed Stam Nightblade build. So, two-handed builds, generally speaking, are going to pull a little bit less single target DPS than their dual-wield counterparts. That's just due to the nature of the weapon itself. You're missing out on one enchant or one weapon trait. You're missing out on a couple of different passives, and generally speaking, the two-handed line doesn't do quite as much single target DPS as the dual equivalent. That being said, where two-handed builds really shine is going to be in AoE potential, and so that's kind of where a lot of endgame raiders kind of use two-handed builds in those fights where AoE DPS is a little bit more important than single target DPS. Examples of this would be, for example, trash fights in some of the full-length trials, as well as a couple of boss fights. Lokkestiiz hard mode in particular comes to mind, where standard DPS might be better served running a two-handed build rather than a dual-wield build, just in order to increase your overall AoE DPS. Now, just like the other two-handed build videos, we will not be going over gear or our character sheet or CPs. That is all covered in the previous video, just kind of covering just generic gear and other sort of build things. There is a link that video showing up right around now in the upper right hand corner. So pause this video, go check out that video if you guys want to see what gear I'm running, and then come back here. We will be talking mainly about the skills and the rotation here on this build. So without further ado, let's go over our skills. So on our front bar we have Killer's Blade, Wrecking Blow, Carve, Relentless Focus, Barbed Trap, and Flawless Dawnbreaker. You can replace Flawless Dawnbreaker with Incapacitating Strike if you would like. It's kind of up to you. I found to be pretty similar DPS overall, depending on whichever one you decide to run. Incapacitating Strike on the front bar just makes it a little bit easier to use that ultimate whenever you have it up. That way you don't have to necessarily sit on it until you get to your back bar, for example, to use it. Do keep in mind that Incapacitating Strike does now have a little bit of a cast time associated with it. It's about 0.4 seconds here. So if you're trying to weave something in that 0.4 seconds, you won't be able to. So just keep in mind that the Incapacitating Strike does have a cast time now associated with it. As for our spammable, Wrecking Blow ended up doing better than Surprise Attack. However, Surprise Attack does have a secondary functionality behind it, which reduces the enemy's physical resistance by 5% if you are flanking them, so you have to be at the sides or right behind them. That might be more beneficial than just the raw damage that Wrecking Blow is able to provide, so you can pick whichever one you want. So in terms of raw single target DPS though, Wrecking Blow is going to be stronger than Surprise Attack. As for why we're not running Executioner, well, Killer's Blade in general is going to be a little bit stronger. The Executioner does end up scaling a little bit better overall, especially when you get to lower health, because Killer's Blade just does a flat 300% more damage. However, including Executioner and then swapping to Killer's Blade, that window there is going to be very small, so there's really no reason to run Executioner at all. Now, there is going to be a potential argument to run Reverse Slice instead, and that's mainly because Killer's Blade and Executioner are both single target executes. Reverse Slice, as you can see from the secondary effect, does have a splash component associated with it. So in kind of staying in line with the idea that two-handed builds are built more for AoE potential, Reverse Slice might be a better execute move to use instead of Killer's Blade if you're more concerned about that AoE potential. It still does a pretty decent amount of DPS. It still scales up to 300% more damage at less than 50% health. It is going to be doing less damage than Killer's Blade, as you can see here, 4383 with a flat 300 once you hit 25% or below, versus Reverse Slice, which is 4383, but instead of going 300% right off the bat at 25% or lower, it scales. So it's not going to be quite as strong as Killer's Blade, but because of that splash damage, will do more AoE DPS. I also want to point out that instead of running Carve, you can also run Brawler instead for that additional damage shield. So if you're not really concerned about the bleed that Carve has, you're willing to give up that little bit of DPS, you can instead run Brawler, which gives you a damage shield, which actually ends up improving your overall survivability. The base shield strength is in this instance 4.8k, but you do get an additional 50% as long as you hit one enemy. So once you hit an enemy, it actually jumps up by another 2.4k, giving you a 7.2k damage shield here. So it's actually quite a big damage shield overall. So definitely really great for survivability, so definitely something that you should consider doing. It also sort of acts as a quasi-spamble, not as strong obviously as Wrecking Blow, but in trash fights where you have a lot of enemies that you just got to hit all at once, you can just spam Brawler and basically, I don't want to say you'd be invincible, but it becomes very difficult to kill you if you're spamming Brawler this way. Moving on to our back bar now, we have Consuming Trap, Poison Injection, Arrow Barrage, Leeching Strikes, Barbed Trap again, and Incapacitating Strike. Now you'll notice that we have Barbed Trap double barred here. You do want to try to keep Barbed Trap on the front bar at the very least for the 3% additional weapon damage, but on the back bar location you could replace this with any other potential abilities here. It really depends on kind of what sort of utility that you're looking for. So, for example, you could decide to run Relentless Focus, so that way you can still use your bow proc while you're on your back bar. Not a particularly good option, but it's still an option nonetheless. You can also run something like Dark Shadow, which helps out with minor maim. It should normally be placed on the boss already through Heroic Slash from the tank. But if you do need sort of an AoE minor maim, Dark Shade is possible. It is possible to apply that minor maim with their AoE attack. That is a potential option here. And then you can also run something like Power Extraction, which might be useful for kind of a spamble in terms of AoE, but since we are running a two-handed build, we're probably not going to use Power Extraction. We'd more likely use something like Carve or Brawler instead. In terms of other abilities you could potentially run instead of that, if you want a source of major evasion, which reduces damage from AoE attacks by 25%, run either morph of evasion, so elude or shuffle. Both of them have their uses. Shuffle gives you immunity to snares and mobilizations for a certain period of time. Elude gives you that major expedition for some more speed, and it also lasts for a lot longer than shuffle, so you don't have to waste as much stamina re-upping this. But major evasion is a very good tool for overall survivability. A lot of moves in trials particularly count as area attacks, so this does really help out your overall survivability, especially because we don't have access to something like Blade Cloak for major evasion through that route. Other options here, under the Fighter Skilled line, you can run Ring of Preservation if you just want that additional 3% damage on the front bar, for example. You can replace this with Ring of Preservation for the minor protection as well as the heal. The heal does scale off of max stamina and weapon damage, and so it actually heals more on you than it would if a healer were to run it. So 634 every half second here, which results in a little bit over a 1.2k heal per second, which is actually fairly decent. It also provides that minor protection for some additional damage reduction, so pretty decent kind of self-heal slash damage mitigation move if you are looking for something like that. And then under the Undaunted line, if you have some bow builds in group, you could also run Shadow Silk. It does do a decent amount of damage. The Black Widow synergy has been nerfed a few times over the past few patches, but it's still essentially free damage on a synergy, so it's still worth running if you have people who are running bow builds. If you need a shield for whatever reason, you can also run Bone Surge. Not particularly great, especially if you consider that as a two-handed build you have access to Brawler, which is a stronger shield. Not particularly useful here, and generally speaking, if you're running this for the synergy, usually it's going to be on a support role instead, but this is still an option if you want to have that sort of damage shield there. Then if you want a self-heal, you can go with either morph of Vigor. So Echoing Vigor lasts for 10 seconds, but it hits multiple people. Resolving Vigor only hits you. Heals for basically the exact same in terms of raw healing done per second, but it's over a shorter period of time, so it's going to act a little bit more as a burst heal compared to Echoing Vigor. Now, the kind of flip side of Echoing Vigor is that it does stack with other sources of Echoing Vigor. So if you have 4 stamina DPS and all of you are running Vigor, you essentially get 4 ticks of Vigor every 2 seconds, compared to something like Resolving Vigor, where while you would end up getting about 2.5 times the same amount of heals, it's going to still be over 10 seconds. So generally speaking, most stamina DPS will prefer to run Echoing Vigor if you have multiple stamina DPS in group. If it's only you, if you're the only one running Vigor, then just run Resolving Vigor instead. But generally speaking, Echoing Vigor is going to be a little bit more beneficial to the group compared to running Resolving Vigor. And that's pretty much it for all the different skills that you might want to consider running here on a two-handed build. So that's pretty much it for the skills. Like I said, gear, the gear, character sheet, CPs, those are all covered in a separate video, so make sure to check that out. Again, we're just going to be going straight into the rotation itself. Coming over here to a 6 million dummy, the rotation is pretty much identical to a dual wield stamina build, stamina Nightblade build, in the fact that it is fairly dynamic. You're still going to be centered around that bow proc. Now, the only difference here between this build and a dual wield build is, of course, your spammable. It does have a cast time associated with it, 0.8 seconds. So, because of that, you have to keep in mind that cast time abilities, channeled abilities, you can't light attack weave while you're doing it, you can't drink potions, you can't activate synergies while you're in that channeled animation. That is just something you want to keep in mind here. But, like I said, rotation itself is pretty dynamic. And then one of the challenges, of course, is trying to figure out when you want to use Maarselok, because, again, you can't really do anything while you're in that channel. My general recommendation is to use Maarselok, the bash, right after you use Carve. So, Carve, bash. And you can see on that last rotation, we did break our backbar rotation because we had our bow prop go off, like so. So it's always going to be a little bit different. There's not really going to be a kind of set rotation here. It's all going to be really dependent on your general bow proc status. So there's really no sort of staticness to Nightblade rotations at all. For those guys who played Nightblades for a while, you guys will recognize this, and you will have to adapt your overall rotation. That does make stamina Nightblades more difficult to master. But it's definitely more of a dynamic playstyle, and a lot of players prefer that rather than just a boring old, 4-step static rotation kind of thing. Now, we will be doing a 200 million dummy parse. You guys get an idea of the amount of DPS that we're able to pull. Now, I do want to keep in mind here that we will be using parse food in order to get an accurate comparison, cross-class comparison here. Plus, of course, we will be doing lower single target DPS. I've said this a couple of times right now in this video, but we will be doing lower single target DPS, so do not expect us to pull the same DPS as a dual wield build. Instead, this will kind of be highlighting the kind of gap between there and the amount of single target DPS you'll be sacrificing for a larger trash AoE DPS potential. So let's go ahead and get started here, and I will try to narrate while we do the parse here. Oh, I forgot to activate my bow. That's gonna potentially lower DPS a little bit, hopefully not too much. Again, you want to use Maarselok right after you put the Carve down. Because we are using Lokkestiiz on the front bar, I want to make sure we're using our synergy while we're on our front bar. Keep messing up the Maarselok bash. Now, in terms of when you want to use your ultimate, I'm just going to re-up the bow prop before we look at back bar, so it doesn't run out on us. I like to use it before I use poison injection, but you don't necessarily have to do that. You could just use it right away after poison injection. But because it does have a cast time associated with it, you will not be able to bar swap cancel out of it. So that's why I like to use it before poison injection. Because if I do that, then at the very least I'll be able to animation cancel out of the poison injection on the bar swap cancel. So one of the advantages of running Barb Trap on both bars is you can pretty much pick whichever bar you want to use Barb Trap on. For example, if you know it's going to run out while you're on your front bar, you could use it on your front bar. Or if it's going to run out on your back bar, you can use it on your back bar. Alright, so once we get into execute range here, we're going to pretty much drop our bow proc. We don't need to run bow proc anymore. So at this point here, we're going to drop Carve as well. And just maintain our back bar dots here, our ultimate, and our bash as well for Maarselok. We're using Maarselok right when we go to our front bar here to spam Killer's Blade. Stay in our front bar here and just do Killer's Blade rather than the other dots as we get to the end of the parse here. So there we go, that is the two-handed parse. We pulled a little bit over 85k, 85.1k if we decide to round up to the nearest 100. So definitely lower single target DPS, that is to be expected. But again, we are gaining a little bit of additional AoE potential here, especially if we use something like Carve. If we just spam Carve, or if we're running Brawler instead in a trash fight, you will definitely be able to get a lot higher AoE DPS compared to a dual wield build. Just because it's going to be a little bit better than Steel Tornado or Whirling Blades. Not by too much, but it also provides a lot of additional survivability as well if you're using Brawler. So you get a little bit more survivability as well as better overall cleave potential with the two-handed build. That doesn't mean that the dual wield build doesn't have cleave potential, it's just a little bit harder to do that, and it's also a little bit more costly in order to kind of build yourself in terms of sustain as a kind of AoE build, as a dual wield build here. But that's going to be it for this build video. If you guys have any questions about this, please feel free to leave them down in the comment section below. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability. Hope you guys found this video informative, and I'll see you guys in the next dungeon.